Lady Death is the gripping memoir of Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the most lethal female sniper in history. Dive into the harrowing and heroic account of a young Soviet woman who became a legend during World War II with 309 confirmed kills. In this episode, Pavlichenko faces the Romanians. Let's begin. At the beginning of September 1941, 3 to the 5th of September, I believe we found out that while remaining in the eastern sector of the Odessa defensive district, our regiment would be temporarily joining a newly formed rifle division, initially known as the 1st Odessan, and then given the number 421. Our old acquaintances ended up with us, the 1st Regiment of the Naval Infantry under the command of Colonel Y. Osipov, now the 1330th, and the 26th Regiment of the NKVD, now the 1331st, and strengthened by troops from the former fortified district numbers of 82, as well as an artillery regiment, a sapper battalion, a machine gun battalion, and some other units. The position of divisional commander was occupied by G.M. Kochenov. Staff headquarters were in the Kuyalnik Hospital, and its advanced command post was located in the village of Ternovka. The division was faced with the task of maintaining a front 17 kilometers in length and resisting 2 fully manned Romanian infantry divisions. We beat back their attacks all day on the 6th of September, and on the 7th we went on the offensive ourselves. The Romanians retreated between 0.5 and 2 kilometers to the north on the various sectors of the front, leaving on the field approximately 700 dead and seriously wounded troops and officers. About 200 of them ended up as our prisoners, and ordnance, mortars, machine and submachine guns, and a lot of ammunition were seized. The following day, the 8th of September, the Romanians fell upon the 3rd Battalion of our regiment, which was taking up positions on the isthmus between the Kursk and Ajibaisk and Kuyalnik estuaries. We hurried to the aid of our regimental mates and, with our combined forces, drove back the enemy attack. Fierce fighting with strong artillery shelling continued on 9, 10, and the 11th of September. It was then that the former border guards, the courageous and disciplined troops, who had now become the 1331st Rifle Regiment, broke through ahead. They established themselves firmly on the line between Bolgarka village, Avgustovka village, and the northern bounds of the village of Protopopovka. In clashes like this, when huge masses of forces were fighting on a flat plain, what was the sniper to do? The answer was simple: to occupy previously set up fortifications. There were some in this area, with other troops, and to carry out targeted fire from their trenches. All the more so, since the enemy was advancing regardless of any losses. At this point, I witnessed a scene that was almost fanciful in the context of the Second World War. The Romanians had mounted a psychological attack. First, as was usually the case, the artillery boomed away for about 20 minutes. The Soviet soldiers and officers waited it out in well-equipped deep dug-outs and trenches. No great damage was inflicted on the 54th Regiment. Then silence descended. The troops returned to their positions and began to look into the distance. There, something unusual was happening. The sounds of stirring music reached our ears. We saw that the infantry in their pudding basin helmets were not spreading out across the steppe, but on the contrary, sticking together in close, dense columns, standing shoulder to shoulder and marching as if on parade, raising their feet high to the rhythmic beat of the drums. Somewhere in the second or third column, a banner was billowing over the soldiers' heads. Keeping their distance and shouldering their unsheathed sabers, the officers were striding along in the gaps between the columns. On the left flank was a priest in full parade garb, his gold-embroidered gown, glinting in the rays of the bright autumn sun, looked strange against the background of the monolithic military formation. 3 church banners followed him, carried by Romanian soldiers. The priest, it subsequently turned out, was Ukrainian. It was not without some amazement that I viewed the attacking force through binoculars. They were approaching closer and closer. Soon it became evident that the soldiers were drunk. They were not maintaining their formation so strictly, and their marching was not all that precise. But would it be possible to force sober men to walk out onto an absolutely flat, easily targeted plain, even if they were convinced of their racial superiority over those they intended to exterminate? They had probably been endowed with confidence in victory by one other circumstance: their large numerical superiority, marching against our 1st Battalion, in which no more than 400 were left. To the sound of loud music from a military band was an infantry regiment of peacetime proportions, 2,000 bayonets. Inexorably, the distance was growing shorter. The Romanians approached to within 700 meters, and our mortar battery launched a first strike against them. Fountains of earth soared up to the sky amidst the sandy grey columns. Their formation broke down for a while, but leaving their dead behind them, those still alive closed ranks and continued the advance. At the officer's command, they upped their pace and took their rifles in their hands. The blades of the bayonets gleamed like lightning against the dusty expanses of the steppe. I waited patiently until the first enemy column drew level with a fence at the edge of a maize field. I drew a preliminary firing diagram and marked out the distances along it. The fence was 600 meters away from my trench. Some wolfberry thickets were 500 meters, and a lone tree with a broken crown was 400 meters away. The soldiers of King Mihai Vand were now unknowingly moving into the field of direct fire. A direct sniper's shot is an entirely amazing thing. For this shot, the trajectory of the bullet did not rise above the target for the entire distance of the shot. For instance, as in the given situation, by using a setting of 6 and aiming at the heels of the marching enemy soldiers, it was possible to fire several shots without resetting the telescope sight. The enemy would be hit first in the leg, then, on coming closer, in the stomach, and closer still at 300 meters in the chest, and finally in the head. Then, as they approached still closer to the sniper, the order would be reversed: chest, stomach, leg. I had developed a favorite method of shooting by then, hitting the enemy between the eyes or in the temple. But as I looked at the infantry armada marching to the beat of the drum, I thought that this time a shot to the head alone would be an impermissible luxury. The main thing now was to fire and fire and fire, just to stop the psychological attack of drunk soldiers who had no idea what they were doing to prevent the Romanians from reaching our trenches. After all, with their 5-fold numerical advantage, they would simply trample our valiant battalion into the ground and wipe out all my comrades in arms. They didn't make it. The sun was setting, illuminating the muted feather grass of the steppe with weak slanting rays. Moving back, The Romanians carried away their wounded, but the dead, up to 300 of them, it seemed, remained behind. Stepping over the bodies of the fallen enemy with Lieutenant Voronin, who had replaced our now wounded former company commander, Lieutenant Lubivi, I sought out my own kills and put them down in my sniper's notebook. As well as me, our machine gunners and other riflemen of the second company had also fired with great success. Everyone had the same rifle cartridges, caliber 7.62 mm. I regarded as my own those who had bullet holes in their head, neck, or the left side of their chest. There were 19 of them, including 7 officers and 1 non-commissioned officer. Were you specifically aiming at the officers? Asked the lieutenant. Yes, that's what the instructions prescribe. An excellent result, Lyudmila. I served the Soviet Union. They decided on a psychological attack, said Voronin pensively. Did they not feel anything for their men? They simply regard us as weaklings. 2 attacks in an hour, and now they have rolled back a kilometer. Neither sight nor sound of them. It's the volatile Romanian nature, I joked. Attack in a bunch with a lot of noise and clamor, and if victory doesn't come, run away as fast as your legs will carry you. Lieutenant Andrei Alexandrovich Voronin had graduated from the Kirov Leningrad Red Banner Infantry College in 1939, served before the war in the Volga military district, and had recently ended up in Odessa with the drafted reinforcements, but he had no frontline experience. He was very interested in sniper operations and asked about various details. It was the lieutenant's intention to reward me for accurate shooting with an out-of-turn promotion in military rank, and he did this. I became a junior sergeant and was full of respect for the young officer. He came from a dyed-in-the-wool Leningrad family. His father, a history scholar, worked at the Hermitage and wanted his son to follow him, but Andrei had dreamed of a military career from childhood. Nevertheless, he had a good knowledge of history, and we sometimes talked about the deeds of our bellicose forebears. I strove to live up to the new order from the company commander as well as I could. He sent me on a mission to wipe out the enemy machine gun, which was directing truly accurate and lethal fire from the direction of Gildendorf village, making it impossible for our troops to raise their heads. During the last 10 days of September, the Soviet High Command was preparing to inflict a blow on the enemy in the eastern sector, using the forces of the 421st and 157th Rifle Divisions. The latter arrived in Odessa from Novosibirsk on the 17th of September, a force of over 12,000 troops and artillery, consisting of 24 76 mm caliber field guns, 36 152 mm caliber howitzers, plus a triple supply of ammunition. This was of huge assistance because the regiments of the 421st Division had almost no cannons. 3 ordnance for kilometer-long front line versus 18 on the Romanian side. According to the plan, the advance was to be supported by our Air Force, the 37th and 38th Coastal Batteries, and also the ships of the Black Sea Fleet with their cannons. The villages of Gildendorf, Birba, Bolgarka, Alexandrovka, and the Voroshilov collective farm lay in the sector of the main Termde thrust. It was up to our 2 battalions of the 54th Regiment, along with the 5 battalions of the 157th Rifle Division, to take Gildendorf by storm. The troops of our regiment had earlier driven the enemy out of the cemetery, situated about 200 meters from the southern tip of the village. There were trees growing in the cemetery, 5 tall maples with spreading crowns and thick ash-gray trunks, which had managed somehow to survive the bombing raids and artillery attacks. The difficulties involved in camouflage on the steppe receded here. From the book Combat in Finland, I knew that in the Karelian forests, the Finnish snipers, the so-called cuckoos, engaged in targeted shooting at our forces while hidden in the branches of the trees, pines, firs, and spruces. Why couldn't I make use of this experience? The lieutenant approved my plan. All evening I embroidered my new camouflage jacket with its green hood and brown pattern. The sergeant major had given me some shreds of camouflage netting and somebody's old tunic, which I cut up into ribbons and short strips. Shaggy ribbon came in handy for covering the rifle barrel. I distributed the rest of it, along with maple leaves, twigs, and clumps of grass, so that it lost its former clear outline and began to resemble the garb of a wood sprite or a marsh devil. 1.5 hours before first light, I set off for the cemetery. The residents of the village of Gildendorf, settlers from Germany, were not altogether poor people. With German thoroughness, they had established not only the village but also, not far away from it, the churchyard with its straight paths and graves with stone monuments and fretted grills. Trees shaded the eternal resting place of Gildendorf's first burgomaster, the worthy Wilhelm Schmidt, who had died in 1899 according to the inscription on the marble monument. Planting my legs on the black slab, I began to clamber up the trunk of a mighty maple which leaned over the tomb. My equipment comprised only the most essential things: a Mosin sniper rifle with PE sight, a belt with 2 ammunition pouches full of cartridges, Whittle-type light bullets, and black-tipped B-30 armor-piercing bullets, because I was intending not just to shoot the machine gunners, but to put their fiendish machine out of commission. A flask in a cloth cover, and a Finnish-type army knife. I did not take binoculars, nor a steel helmet, because my hearing had deteriorated following the shell shock, and the helmet made it difficult for me to detect faint sounds. Just before sunrise, a gust of wind blew. The maple leaves began to rustle, but the thick branches spreading out from the tree's massive trunk did not even sway. Setting my feet on them, I set up my rifle conveniently on another branch at roughly the same level as my shoulders and looked through the eyepiece of the telescope sight at the village. Its one street, lined with single-story stone houses, a mill, a church, and a school, now lay plainly visible before me. In an orchard surrounding a large dilapidated house, I saw an MG 34 all-purpose German machine gun on a tripod, and boxes of cartridge belts next to it. The machine gun had telescope sights, so that was the secret of its devastating impact. Well, you noxious fascist dogs, I'll teach you. At 7 o'clock in the morning the guard changed. However, the soldiers with rifles did not interest me. I was waiting for the machine gunners. They appeared later, 3 Romanians in sandy grey jackets and kipis with their funny crowns stretched to form a double peak, front and back. First, they busied themselves with the machine gun, then they sat under the trees and began to treat themselves to the large, golden, yellow pears, masses of which were lying around under the trees in the orchard. I planned to take 3 shots, no more, and one of them would be at the breech of the machine gun. Inserting a cartridge with a light bullet into the barrel bore, I closed the bolt and pressed my face close to the telescope sight. The target, the head of the tall soldier sitting near the MG 34 tripod, was situated between the two black lines, and only seconds remained before the shot was taken. But suddenly, there was some sort of commotion in the orchard. The machine gunners leapt up, lined up, and froze at attention. A minute later, some officers in peaked caps came up to them. One of them looked most interesting, a cigar in his mouth, a gold strip along the edge of his cap, a braided loop hanging from his right shoulder, a brown leather satchel at his side, and a long whip in his hand. All in all, he had a haughty and authoritative air. I knew the distance, about 200 meters. The wind had died down. The air temperature was approaching 25 degrees. I took as my target not the soldier, but the man with the braided loop, held my breath, counted out to myself, 22, 22, and smoothly pressed the trigger. The Romanians heard the shot. How could one not have heard it in the heavy morning silence? Still, it probably did not immediately cross their minds that a sniper was operating. The adjutant, for the braided loops are part of their uniform, did not even cry out as he keeled over. They began to fuss around him, quite pointlessly, as the bullet had hit him between the eyes. I managed to reload the rifle twice, and both machine gunners also ended up on the ground. The armor-piercing bullet from the fourth shot struck the breech of the MG 34 and put it out of commission. The enemy had recovered their senses by now and were pounding the cemetery with mortars and rifle fire. Bullets and mortar splinters whistled around me. I clung to the thick trunk of the maple, but soon realized that it offered poor protection. A clump of 5 trees was not the equivalent of an age-old Karelian forest, in which it was difficult to pick out anything among the shapes of the giant pines. Pieces of hot metal were flying like a lethal swarm, knocking down leaves and breaking the thin twigs. My heart grew cold from a fearful feeling of danger, but there was no confusion. It is the new recruit who believes this cannot happen to me. A soldier who has been under fire thinks instead, this could happen to me, so I need to be more careful. Anyone who has witnessed the death of his or her comrades a number of times is aware. This ought to happen to me, but it will not happen if only I can get out of here. I had to jump straight away, even just to the ground, about 3 meters below. So as not to break the expensive optics, I hung the rifle on a branch which was sticking out much lower down, and then I plunged down, almost as if I had been hit. I fell awkwardly, striking a gravestone with my right hip, and could not get up because of the severe pain. Voronin sent in some soldiers, and they helped me to get back on my feet and took me to a dugout. The advance began at 9 o'clock of the morning on the 21st of September, 1941, preceded by a lengthy artillery barrage. It seemed as if the earth was shaking from the salvos of Soviet ordnance and mortars. My regimental mates were preparing for an attack on Gildendorf, and I was lying in a dugout suffering the pain in my right hip and reflecting on the fact that what was written in Combat in Finland was of course true, but nevertheless, in applying other people's experience, you need to use your own head and analyze local conditions. The raid on the cemetery and the sharp shooting from the tree now struck me as downright hazardous. But as the proverb says, all's well that ends well. Sometime towards 11 o'clock, the enemy were driven out of Gildendorf and even out of the Ilitchiivka state farm. In a disorderly fashion, the Romanians were withdrawing their forces to the north, abandoning dead and wounded, arms and ammunition on the battlefield. Our troops began to survey the newly seized positions and found in the village orchard a shattered German machine gun, and next to it 2 soldiers and an officer with bullets through their heads. This was my contribution to the overall victory, and Lieutenant Voronin acknowledged that I had done much to assist the second company. He ordered medical orderly Yelena Pali, a student in her second year at the Odessa Medical Institute, who had joined the Red Army as a volunteer in August, to handle my treatment, which the disciplined Lena carried out with great diligence. She gave me tablets for pain relief, placed cold compresses on my liver, and put me on a special diet of buckwheat porridge boiled without fats. But what helped me more than the porridge were the care and attention which my regimental mates lavished upon me as a reward for taking out that enemy machine gun. They brought me treats, juicy golden pears from the orchard, toilet soap, and flacons of eau de cologne from a cart captured from the Romanians. The company commander also visited me. He told me that the haughty man with the braided loops whom I had shot had turned out to be the adjutant of the dictator Antonescu himself, Major Gheorghiu Caraga. Important staff papers, letters, photographs, and a diary were found on his body. The major had written of the grave state of the Romanian army, which had met fierce Russian resistance near Odessa. The diary was transferred to the staff headquarters of the Coastal Army, and from there to Moscow. Fragments of it were published by the newspaper Pravda in October 1941. A memento of the episode with the 5 maples in the cemetery at Gildendorf remained with me in the form of a silver cigarette case, with beautiful chasing and engraving on the lid, which carried a picture of a beautiful woman in a luxurious hat with ribbons and feathers. It had been found on the dead Romanian major, and Andrei Voronin gave it to me as a trophy when he visited me. I pressed on the button. The cigar case opened, and we beheld the long, thin, brown cigarettes packed densely inside. I offered them to the lieutenant. He declined, saying, "I don't smoke." "Have you been smoking long, Lyudmila?" "No, I learned at the front. Sometimes it helps to relieve the nervous tension." "Does that happen often?" asked the company commander. "Usually after an operation, when the enemy has been annihilated. When waiting in a hideout, I don't feel any emotions. I simply wait and think about making sure the rifle doesn't miss." "You think about your weapon?" asked the lieutenant in surprise. "Of course. For a sniper, her weapon is almost sacred." Our conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Lena Pali. She brought in 3 mugs of hot tea, generously sweetened with honey, a gift from local residents to the valiant troops of the Red Army, and we indulged in memories of life before the war. Andrei proved an interesting conversationalist and gave us a vivid account of the Hermitage. He loved this museum and knew its collections, especially the collection of Scythian gold which his father devoted himself to studying. I, in turn, described how, following my first year at university, I had gone on archaeological practical work at excavations near the town of Chernigov. There I had seen a spherical, conical iron helmet from the 10th century, numerous arrow and spearheads and fragments of chainmail uncovered. I regret that I'm unable to draw a more detailed portrait of the commander of the second company, Andrei Voronin. Our acquaintance did not continue long. He was a colorful representative of that generation of young people who grew up in the post-revolutionary years, studied at Soviet institutes of higher learning, and then went through the crucible of the Great War for the fatherland. True patriots, they were noble, bold, and staunch people who unthinkingly gave their lives for its freedom and independence. Andrei acted in the same way. He held the position of company commander for barely more than a month. He lost his life in the battles around the village of Tatarka, while rousing his troops for a counterattack. An enemy bullet pierced his heart, and we buried him in the village cemetery under a red star made of plywood. After the victory gained on 21 and the 22nd of September over units of the Romanian Fourth Army in the sector of the Odessa Defense District, the Soviet High Command planned to inflict an equally powerful blow on the enemy in the western and southern sectors. We received the order to transfer our base to the Dalnik village Tararka-Bogarsky Kutora line, and in this way we were finally reunited with two other battalions of the 54th Rifle Regiment, taking our place in reserves of the 25th Chapayev Division. Our path lay through Odessa, and we rejoiced at the prospect of seeing the splendid Black Sea city which we were defending. The overall picture was no cause for joy. First, we went through Peresip. There, only the electricity station was operating, and the factories stood with their workshops smashed and their chimneys fallen. The town itself had suffered severely from bombing raids and artillery attacks. We walked along the roadway. The footpaths were occupied by women and children. They held in their hands kettles, jugs, and buckets, and gave us water to drink, treated us to cigarettes. I recall the brands, Kiev and Litka, and they called to us with welcoming, tender, and encouraging words. Only later did we realize that they had shared with us their meager water ration, which was a total of 1 bucket of water per person per day. At the new base, we were given a week to relax, and I was called over by Captain Sergienko. He said that he had sorted through the reports of the company commanders and checked the documents, and it turned out that my sniper's tally was over 100 dead fascists. I confirmed this information. The battalion commander teased me a little for my excessive modesty, suggesting that it was up to me to remind him of such an achievement. I thought to myself, and what would that have proved? Dozens of times reckless heroes have, before my very eyes, thrown themselves with grenades at Romanian tanks, fired away down to their last cartridge in the trenches, and beaten back the swarming enemy with bayonets and rifle butts in hand-to-hand combat. When has anyone from the High Command voiced appreciation of their feats? But they are not bitter in the slightest, for it is not for medals and decorations that we are standing here on the bare steppe under hellish fire. Sergenko had perhaps somehow guessed my train of thought. He smiled, said that he would soon put everything right, and I would have a trip to the divisional staff headquarters in the village of Dalnik. I did not particularly believe him, and answered, "Yes, comrade captain," and forgot about our conversation. I had to go all the same. At that time, I knew nothing about the new commander of our division, Major General Ivan Yefimovich Petrov. I had no particular regrets about that. Between a divisional commander and the commander of a detachment in an infantry regiment, which was what I had become, thanks to Lieutenant Voronin, there was an enormous gulf. Would generals be bothered with junior sergeants? Petrov's adjutant invited me to enter. Inside the room, I saw before me a man of about 45, taller than average height, lean, red tinges in his hair, with a brush of coarse hair on his upper lip, and a face that was commanding, intelligent, and decisive. He wore pince-nez, and his tunic was decked with cavalry shoulder straps because, as his Tacitus says, he had until recently been in command of the 1st Cavalry Division, which was then fighting near Odessa. From the first glance, he appeared to me to be a natural-born military man, an officer from a family of officers. Only later did I discover that he had the most proletarian roots. His father was a cobbler in the town of Trubchevsk, but had managed to give his son an education. First, he graduated from grammar school and then the Karachev teaching seminary, and from there, in January 1917, he ended up in the cadet college of St. Alexei in Moscow. The general looked at me calmly, almost with apathy. "Comrade Junior Sergeant," he said in a low, hoarse voice, "in recognition of your services at the front, the High Command is awarding you a sniper rifle, inscribed with your own name. Strike the fascists without mercy." The divisional commander's adjutant handed me a newish SEVT Pick 40 rifle with a PAU telescope sight, which was shorter and lighter than the P sight. Beautifully engraved on the metal tube was 100. For the first 100 to Juntar Sergeant Pavlichenko, LM, from the commander of the 25th Divert, Major General Petrov, IY. "I serve the Soviet Union," I solemnly responded, and then brushed my lips against the jet-black barrel, after which I stood it by my side. The general looked surprised at my action. However, it was not just a weapon, but an award, a sacred object, given to me to fight a sacred war and to wreak vengeance on a treacherous enemy. Petrov stepped forward. I met his attentive and interested glance. "Have you been in the army long, Lyudmila Mikhailovna?" he asked. "No, comrade. Major General, I joined as a volunteer at the end of June." "And what were you before that?" "I was studying at Kiev University, history faculty, 4th year." "You handle a rifle superbly," Petrov remarked. "I graduated with distinction from the Osoaviakim Sniper School in Kiev," I reported clearly. "Are you Ukrainian?" he asked this in a strange, disgruntled tone. "No, Comrade Major General," I replied quickly, for these questions of nationality they always irritated me. "I'm Russian. My maiden name is Belova. I am Pavlichenko, only by marriage." Simply amazing, Lyudmila. Petrov strode around the room. "I once knew a Belov, Mikhail Ivanovich, but it was during the Civil War. He was a commissar in a regiment back in the days of Chapayev, a man of extraordinary courage. It was along with him that I received the Order of the Red Banner for the attack on Ufa and Belebey. We smashed the Whiteys to smithereens." "That's my father, Comrade Major General. A remarkable encounter," said the divisional commander, and turned to me with a jovial smile. "So family traditions are alive and well. I think you resemble your father, not only in character, but also in your looks." "That's what everyone says, Comrade Major General." Of course, as a divisional commander at Unate, he had many urgent things to do, but he considered it necessary to treat the daughter of an old comrade in arms, so a cup of tea, and to ask about our family, my father's life in peacetime, and my service in the 54th Regiment. I responded briefly and clearly, as appropriate for a soldier. "They don't try to upset you?" asked Petrov in concluding the conversation. "No, Ivan Yefimovitch. They are kind to me and offer help if needed, particularly since I love military service." "Well done, girl." The general shook my hand firmly on parting. I went back to the 1st Battalion's lines as if I was floating on air, and immediately informed Captain Sergenko of the High Command's gift, boasted about the rifle with the inscription of commemoration, but said nothing about the private conversation with Petrov. It seemed to me that my personal acquaintance with the divisional commander was no great matter. Better to remain a sniper than to be known among one's regiment as the girl enjoying the protection of the High Command. However, the Major General did not forget our meeting. 3 days later, an order came through from the divisional headquarters awarding me the next military rank of sergeant. This concludes the 5th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. To 9. What do you think of Pavlichenko's story? Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.